Hi guys, Omores here. I just tested Windows 11 on a bunch of ancient CPUs, including this Intel Core i7-920 launched in late 2008. Back then it was a top CPU and it could get you a perfect score on Windows Vista, but that was then. Now, according to Microsoft, it has absolutely no business running Windows 11. So of course we're going to install the latest Windows 11 26H2 build on it anyway. But first, let me show you this short 1-minute video that completely went viral. It's basically a bunch of clips from my last video where Windows 11 23H2 got installed on a DDR motherboard with an AGP GPU. The story was first picked up by Tom's Hardware, which wrote an article from a Rampapocalypse perspective. Fair enough, whatever works. Then it was picked up by pretty much every other tech site you can think of. After reading all those articles and the comments, I realized there is a bit of confusion about what actually works with Windows 11. Not to mention that a lot of people assume that if you launch Chrome on an older system like the Q6600 I used, you'll have time to take a shower before it opens. Well, it's nothing like that, especially with an SSD on board. Just take a look at this unedited footage. It takes about 2 seconds to get going with Chrome. Of course, if the system resources are free. Anyway, that was Windows 11 23H2 released in 2023. Now let's get back to Windows 11 26H2 because it seems that if it has to be Windows 11, everybody wants to run the latest version. Now 26H2 isn't officially out yet, but you can already grab it through the Windows Insider Preview program. And since the installation ISO still includes a legacy bootloader, if you want to go old school and burn it to a DVD, it's actually pretty easy to get the install started on older systems and no extra tools or files are needed. Or if you'd rather keep things simple, just prepare a USB drive with Rufus, because it automatically applies all the registry tweaks you need, whether you're running with UEFI, with CSM enabled, or even a straight-up legacy BIOS. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't Windows 11 all about UEFI, Secure Boot and TPM? And a CPU from 2008 probably runs on a classic BIOS motherboard with no UEFI support whatsoever. And you'd be right, this Gigabyte X58 motherboard, also released back in 2008, only has a classic award BIOS. But that's not actually a deal breaker. You see, while mainstream Windows 11 definitely prefers UEFI, Secure Boot, and TPM, the underlying NT code base has always retained support for BIOS systems. In fact, for variants like Windows 11 IoT Enterprise LTSC, non-UEFI support is actually official, with legacy BIOS listed as an optional platform target. And since all these editions share essentially the same core kernel and setup architecture, if we can officially install it without UEFI support in one edition, it should work the same in all editions, which is why we can easily bypass Secure Boot and TPM requirements by adding just 3 registry lines once the setup has started. This is how we do it. Once the setup screen loads, we just press Shift plus F10 to open the command prompt and type regedit to open the registry editor. Then we have to navigate to HKey local machine /system/setup, right-click setup, and create a new key named labconfig inside it. Then we have to create 2 new dword 32-bit values. Bypass TPM check and bypass Secure Boot check. Once we set both of their values to 1, we can close the registry editor, hit the back button, and just like that, the hardware restrictions are gone. Now the installer can move forward smoothly, and this trick works every time on all Windows editions. On the screen right now you're seeing the 26H1 edition, but it also works on 26H2 and even on the latest experimental build released on the Insider channel. So there is no actual patching required like using custom files or anything like that. That's because Windows 11 can simply run without UEFI firmware. In fact, if you try to install it on a GPT partition, while running on a BIOS system, the setup will refuse to install. So I think it's clear that if we want to install it on a BIOS system, we can do it as long as we don't need those advanced security features. But what about the CPU? When Windows 11 came out, there was a lot of talk about unsupported hardware, especially since relatively new CPUs at the time, like the 7th gen Kaby Lake or this 6th gen Skylake, didn't make the compatibility list. But that's only on paper. During an actual installation, the Windows installer ironically doesn't even care which CPU we have, as long as it supports the required instructions. We'll come back to those in a moment. So here is a 6th gen Skylake CPU, and since this motherboard has Secure Boot and TPM enabled, the installation just goes through, no questions asked and no registry edits needed. So while official support does indeed start with Intel 8th Gen and AMD Zen 2 CPUs, that was basically Microsoft's way of saying we haven't tested Windows 11 on anything older than this. So if something goes wrong, don't call us. Simply because they didn't want any extra complications with hardware support, especially since Windows 11 was offered as a free upgrade. Now, to be fair, Microsoft did have some technical reasons for drawing the line on older CPUs, since Windows 11's security model relies heavily on things like virtualization-based security and hypervisor protected code integrity. While this approach can work on older hardware too, newer CPUs include dedicated hardware that makes these security features run faster and more efficiently with less performance overhead. Now let's talk about CPUs that aren't just unsupported but completely incompatible. When Windows 11 launched, a CPU with SSE3 instructions became a hard requirement. It wasn't a huge deal at first, since almost any 64-bit chip capable of running Windows 8 or 10 already had SSE3. And usually CPUs with SSE3 also include some other critical instructions Windows needs, like LAHF or SAHF and CMP-X-CHG16B. The exception is a handful of early 64-bit CPUs released in 2004, 2005, and early 2006. Some of them are missing one or more of these instructions. For example, this 64-bit Pentium 4 630 with SSE3 instructions released in 2005 can't run anything newer than Windows 7. But if we take a look at the Windows Experience Index, it's not even good enough for Windows Vista. Meanwhile, this 64-bit Celeron D347 from 2006 has all the required instructions and can boot any Windows version up to 23H2. But even if it works, I'm sure we wouldn't want to run Windows 10 or 11 on a single core CPU anyway. If it has to be an older system, an AM3 CPU or a socket 775 quad-core can do a much better job, just like I showed you last time with the Core 2 Quad Q6600. But then, in 2024, Microsoft raised the bar again, and SSE 4.2 instructions became mandatory for Windows 11 24H2. Basically, Socket 775 and the entire AM3 lineup, including Phenom 2 CPUs, became technically incompatible. So these systems have to stick with Windows 10 22H2 or Windows 11 23H2, which are essentially the same thing under the hood. Now, I know what you're thinking. Can't we just bypass these instructions like we do with Secure Boot or TPM requirements? Well, not really. The SSE 4.2 instructions are hard-coded in the kernel, and files like NTOS kernel execute these instructions at boot time, so there is no bypass and no way around it. We just need to use the right CPU to run the latest edition, and if AM3 CPUs don't qualify, AM3 Plus is a whole different case. That was basically a new generation, and the Bulldozer FX series introduced in late 2011 do have SSE 4.2 instructions, so they can run Windows 11 24H2 or the newer 26H2 just fine. Now back to the LGA 1366 configuration. So Here we have an i7-920, which is technically the oldest CPU capable of running the latest Windows 11 at the moment. It's paired with a motherboard that doesn't even have UEFI, and it's old enough to still have an internal floppy connector. By the way, Windows 11 still fully supports internal floppy disk controllers. You'll find plenty of information online claiming that only USB floppy drives are supported. That may sound reasonable, but it's simply not true. So yes, the floppy definitely works, but does Windows 11 actually run well on a configuration like this? I'd say yes, it was totally stable and usable. I didn't get a single blue screen while testing any of these systems. Well, except for the occasional inaccessible boot device error, because I kept moving the same SSD between multiple motherboards, which can always get a bit confusing for Windows. Other than that, every system was fully updated. Then I pushed the hardware a bit with Cinebench, and of course I played a few games. And yes, it does run Crysis, but it also does a decent job with Far Cry 5, which is a much newer title released in 2018. So in the end, running Windows 11 on older hardware can absolutely make sense, even though you'll have to bypass Secure Boot, TPM, and some of Microsoft's official requirements. You still get a fully up-to-date operating system with incredible backward compatibility. In fact, Windows 11 26H2 can still run Doom for Windows natively, even though that same application also ran on Windows 3.1 when it was released back in 1995. And finally, despite my last video making the tech news recently, the article's actually linked to a Reddit post instead of my YouTube video. So it's still up to you to help round up the numbers. If you haven't subscribed already, please hit that button. Thanks for watching. Omores out.